The whir of a drone sliced through the still air, like the hum of a predator on the hunt. Liam Pierce froze in place, his heart skipping a beat. He knew it was coming. He'd felt it, the eyes that followed his every move, the sense of being watched when no one was around. But this was no longer subtle. This was an outright invasion. Liam took a slow breath, his hand tightening around his coffee cup. It was too late to pretend he hadn't noticed. He wasn't imagining things. Karen from the HOA had taken her obsession with controlling every corner of his life to the next level, and now she was using technology to invade his privacy. He watched, helpless, as the drone hovered above his front yard, its lens focused directly on him. He hadn't seen her launch it, hadn't heard it until it was already overhead. But there it was, circling his property like an unblinking eye. This was no ordinary neighborhood watch. This was war. Liam Pierce had always prided himself on the quiet serenity of his neighborhood. The tall oaks lining the streets created a canopy of leaves that whispered secrets on windy days, and the houses, mostly modest, with a few exceptions, stood as a testament to the hard work of their owners. Liam's own home, nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, was the epitome of peace. He had moved here to escape the chaos of city life, to find solace in the small, tight-knit community. But little did he know, the calm that blanketed his existence was about to be shattered, by none other than Karen from the HOA. The Homeowners Association had always been a source of quiet tension among the residents, its iron-fisted rule lurking behind every letter of complaint, every carefully worded notice about maintaining the lawn or repainting the fence. But for the most part, Liam had managed to fly under the radar. He kept to himself, never pushing the boundaries of the rules, yet never fully embracing the suffocating politeness that everyone else seemed to revel in. That is, until Karen came into his life. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had a particular passion for controlling every aspect of the neighborhood. She had a voice that carried across the street like an alarm bell, and an opinion on everything, from the color of his front door to the exact shade of green he should use for his lawn. To her, his wildflower garden, a splash of color on an otherwise uniform street, was an eyesore. She'd complained, of course, subtly at first with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, a tone of forced civility as if she were simply offering friendly advice. "Liam," she had said one Saturday afternoon, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, "the HOA has specific guidelines for landscaping. You really should think about following them. It's about the community, you know." Liam had smiled and nodded, pretending to take her seriously. But the truth was, he had grown to loathe her presence. She wasn't just a stickler for rules. She was a tyrant who believed the neighborhood was hers to control. She had a way of weaving through the streets like a shadow, constantly observing, constantly reporting. She'd even taken it upon herself to organize neighborhood patrols, ensuring that everyone's property was up to her standards. Liam could practically hear her footsteps on the sidewalk whenever she was near, her eyes scanning, judging. It made him feel like an intruder in his own home. On the surface, Liam's life was simple. He woke up early every day, worked from home as a freelance writer, and took long walks through the neighborhood to clear his mind. He found comfort in the predictability, the routine. But recently, he'd begun to notice something unsettling. The neighborhood felt off. The occasional sighting of Karen standing by her window, a pair of binoculars in hand, watching him like a hawk. The quiet hum of a drone overhead, just barely audible on the wind. The chill that crept down his spine every time he stepped outside, as if someone, Karen, was always watching. He'd dismiss it at first, chalking it up to his overactive imagination, but the feeling grew stronger each day. One evening, as Liam sipped his coffee on the porch, staring out at the peaceful street, he saw her again. Karen. But this time, she wasn't just standing in her front yard, hands on her hips, as she often did when passing judgment on his lawn. No, this time she was standing in the middle of the street, her eyes fixed firmly on his house, and in her hands, Liam's blood ran cold, was a small, familiar object. A drone. Liam's heart skipped a beat as the drone lifted off, its whirring blades slicing through the evening air. He watched in disbelief as it soared toward his house, its camera lens trained directly on him. He'd always suspected that Karen had been keeping tabs on him, but this? This was something else entirely. The invasion had begun. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Liam had always been attuned to the rhythm of his neighborhood, the quiet hum of suburban life, the distant chatter of neighbors, and the soft rustle of the trees outside his windows. It was peaceful, predictable, until it wasn't. At first it was subtle, a shadow out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement near his driveway when there should have been none. It could have been anyone, the wind, a bird, or even a kid walking by. But over the past week, it became something else, something deliberate. The first odd occurrence came on a Tuesday morning. Liam was sitting at his kitchen table typing away on his laptop when he caught a glimpse of Karen's car parked across the street. Nothing unusual about that. She often drove by, usually when she was out patrolling the neighborhood for HOA violations. But what stood out that day was the fact that Karen wasn't getting out of the car. She just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead at his house. Not even a casual glance. Just staring. Liam felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He tried to shake off the sensation, convinced he was overthinking it. But when he checked again, her car was still there. She hadn't moved. It wasn't until an hour later that Karen finally drove away, her eyes darting up to meet his as she passed. It was as if she knew he had noticed her. He stood frozen at the window, the feeling that something was wrong settling into his chest. The next few days only intensified the unease. He started noticing the same car parked near his house at odd hours, the occasional sound of footsteps just outside his door, too soft to be footsteps, but distinct enough to make his heart race. And then there was the way she'd show up unexpectedly, at the most random times. Thursday evening, Liam was out walking his dog, Charlie, down the block when he saw her. Karen, standing by her front porch, arms folded, as if she was waiting for him. Her eyes followed him intently as he walked past, but there was something in her gaze that wasn't normal, something cold, calculating. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer a smile. She just watched. "Good evening, Karen," Liam had called out, trying to break the tension. Her lips curved into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. "Just making sure everyone is doing their part," she said in that sickly sweet voice of hers. "Neighborhood looks good, Liam. Very neat." Liam felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. She was always so polite, but the thinly veiled control in her tone made it clear that she was always watching, always inspecting. The next day, the unease became harder to ignore. Liam was working from home when he noticed it. An unusual buzzing sound outside his window. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the sound of his keyboard. But as he paused to listen, the buzzing grew louder. A drone. Liam's eyes shot to the window. There, hovering just above the tree line, was a small, black drone with a red blinking light. It was too small to be a commercial one, but there was no mistaking what it was. Liam's pulse quickened. Was she spying on him? The idea was absurd, but the sight of the drone made the absurd seem possible. It hovered for a moment longer, then darted off in the direction of Karen's house. Was she the one behind this? The thought gnawed at him, filling his gut with a cold sense of dread. He had a hunch, but it wasn't enough to confront her. Yet. The next day, as Liam stepped outside to grab his mail, He saw Karen standing at the edge of her yard. She wasn't looking at him, but he could feel her gaze, like a weight on his back. When she finally turned, their eyes met for a brief, chilling moment. "You know, I noticed something strange on your property," she said with a tight smile. "I'm sure it's nothing, but you really should keep an eye out for those things." The words felt like a warning, though she never specified what she meant. It was as though she was suggesting, no, implying that she was already aware of something that wasn't visible to the naked eye. As Liam walked back to his front door, the drone's buzzing sound replayed in his head, mingling with Karen's unsettling words. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Something wasn't right. And the more he thought about it, the more he was certain. Karen was watching him. She was following him. But why? He didn't know yet, but he was about to find out. Liam had never been one to jump to conclusions. He prided himself on being rational, logical. But this wasn't paranoia. It was a creeping sense of certainty that slithered through his thoughts every time he closed his eyes. Karen was up to something, and it wasn't just petty complaints about his garden or his mailbox anymore. This was something bigger, something darker. The drone had made its appearance again. This time, Liam hadn't been sitting at his window waiting for it. No, it had arrived when he least expected it, buzzing just above his backyard as he grilled dinner. He'd only caught a glimpse of it, a quick flash of black and silver, its sharp, whirring blades cutting through the evening air. He'd barely had time to react before it darted out of view, but the sudden sight of it sent a chill through him. It wasn't just a random hobbyist's drone. This was deliberate, purposeful. Someone was using it to watch him. And from the way it always seemed to appear when he was alone, it wasn't just a coincidence. That night, as he lay in bed, Liam replayed every moment in his head, trying to piece together what he had seen, what he had missed. The drone, Karen's unsettling behavior, the strange glances. All of it seemed to tie together, but he couldn't figure out why. Why had she escalated things like this? Then the breakthrough came. It started with a whisper. A neighbor, a middle-aged man named Gary, had always been friendly, always willing to chat about the weather or the neighborhood gossip. But this time, there was something different in his tone, a nervous energy that made Liam lean in closer. "You heard about Karen's new hobby, right?" Gary asked, eyes darting around the street, as if he were afraid someone would overhear. Liam raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Gary lowered his voice. "A drone. She's got a drone. A little one, but it's always hovering around, following people's movements. Everyone's been talking about it. She says it's for the HOA, to monitor property lines, but, well, I don't know. Feels wrong." Liam's stomach dropped. It wasn't just him. Other neighbors had noticed it too, though none of them had the nerve to speak up. Karen was using the HOA's supposed surveillance powers to justify her little operation. "Karen's been telling people she's using it to enforce community guidelines," Gary continued, "but I'm pretty sure it's just her way of keeping tabs on everything and everyone. It's not right, Liam." Liam's mind raced. The pieces clicked together with an icy finality. Karen hadn't just been watching him out of the corner of her eye. She had been monitoring him, studying him, using a drone to follow his every move. But why him? The thought gnawed at him as he walked back to his house, Gary's words still ringing in his ears. What did she want? Was it his garden? Was it the fact that he had pushed back against the HOA's petty restrictions? Or was it something deeper, something more personal? He needed to know. The next day, Liam decided to do what he should have done weeks ago: investigate. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but now there was no denying it. The drone was no coincidence. And Karen's behavior, her smug, almost superior attitude, was too much to ignore. He spent the day scouring the internet, looking up anything he could find about HOA surveillance and drone laws. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. The HOA could, in theory, use drones to monitor properties, as long as they weren't violating any federal privacy laws. But that was the catch. The HOA didn't own the drone. Karen did. Liam wasn't. Sure, whether it was worse that Karen was using her personal drone for this, or that she had manipulated the HOA into thinking it was all within their rights. Either way, the invasion of privacy was real. That night, after another few hours of digging, Liam saw it again. The drone, hovering near his driveway, just out of sight, its red light blinking in the darkness. His heart pounded in his chest. He was done waiting. Done playing her game. It was time to confront Karen, to put an end to this ridiculous, invasive nonsense. But when he stepped outside, a flash of movement caught his eye. Karen, standing in her front yard, watching him with that same cold, calculating gaze. She knew he knew. "Liam," she called, her voice as sweet as ever. "I hope you're not upset. I'm just looking out for the neighborhood, you know, doing my part." Her smile was all teeth. And in that moment, Liam realized something. This wasn't just about the HOA. This was personal. And she wasn't going to stop until she had destroyed everything he loved about his life. Liam didn't say a word. He turned, walking back to his house, a plan already forming in his mind. It was time to level the playing field. Liam stood in his garage, his fingers brushing the smooth surface of his workbench, the dim light casting long shadows across the cluttered space. His mind raced, calculating the next steps in a game he hadn't even known he was playing, until it was too late. The drone. Karen. The invasion of his privacy. This had gone far beyond petty HOA rules. It was personal now, and he would make sure she regretted underestimating him. He'd spent the last few days buried in research, watching video tutorials, reading articles, and even consulting some forums about drones, specifically how to disrupt them. The more he learned, the clearer the path became. Jamming the drone's signal was the key. A simple, albeit risky, solution. But the details mattered. If he made one wrong move, he could make himself a target. And if he wasn't careful, he'd end up under the watchful eye of local authorities. Liam took a deep breath, looking over the components spread out before him. A few key pieces, a signal jammer, a few batteries, a makeshift antenna, were all he needed to create a device capable of interfering with the drone's communication with its controller. The key was precision. He couldn't afford to just block every signal in the area. It needed to be focused, controlled, and directed straight at Karen's drone. His fingers hovered over the tools, feeling the weight of his decision. This wasn't just about stopping a nuisance. This was about taking control back, about protecting his home from someone who thought they had the right to intrude. But even as he prepared the device, a sense of unease crept in. What if it didn't work? What if Karen's drone was more sophisticated than he anticipated? What if she had countermeasures in place? For the first time, Liam wondered if he was in over his head. He wasn't an engineer or a tech wizard. He was just a regular guy, trying to live his life without having it dissected by a nosy neighbor. But as the pieces came together, the plan seemed less insane. A few adjustments here, a little soldering there, and he would have a device capable of disabling Karen's surveillance, at least long enough for him to make his move. He paused, the weight of what he was about to do sinking in. The drone wasn't the only threat. It was Karen's methods that terrified him. The way she used her power to manipulate the HOA, bending the rules to her will. She wasn't just a busybody. She was dangerous, unpredictable. If she caught wind of what he was planning, there was no telling how far she would go to make him pay. Liam clenched his jaw, pushing the fear aside. He had a plan. He was going to execute it. The first step was making sure the drone didn't see him coming. He needed to wait for the perfect moment. The days passed in a blur as he prepared, every night spent fine-tuning the device. He learned the frequencies drones typically operated on, found the signal range, and worked out the best position for the jammer to hit its target. The thrill of the challenge was almost enough to make him forget why he was doing it in the first place. But every time he saw Karen's car parked on the street or caught a glimpse of that blinking red light hovering near his property, the reality set in. This wasn't a game. This was war. On the morning of the operation, Liam stood at his window staring across the street at Karen's house. His hands were clammy, his heart a steady drumbeat in his chest. The drone hadn't appeared yet, but he could feel it in the air, a tension that wrapped around him, tight and suffocating. Karen had to know something was up. He wasn't sure how, but she had to sense that he was onto her. Then, there it was. The familiar whir, the hum of blades cutting through the air. The drone appeared out of nowhere, drifting lazily over his backyard. The red light blinked again, the unmistakable signal that Karen's eyes were on him, even if she wasn't physically present. Liam's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment he'd been preparing for. He moved swiftly, setting the jammer on the porch and carefully aiming it toward the drone's path. It was a calculated risk. If the device worked, the drone would lose its signal and drop out of the sky. If it didn't, he'd have to face whatever consequences Karen had in store. The whir grew louder and Liam's grip tightened around the jammer. He watched as the drone came closer, heart pounding in his chest. Focus, Liam. This is your only shot. He pressed the button. The world seemed to freeze. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp snap, the drone's whirring stopped. The red light blinked once, then vanished. The drone was falling. Liam's heart raced. This was it. He had taken the first step. Now there was no going back. The morning sun had barely broken through the clouds when Liam spotted it. There it was again, hovering just above the tree line, its black silhouette unmistakable against the pale sky. The drone. It seemed to appear, out of nowhere, drifting lazily on the wind. But Liam knew better. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. He was being watched. Liam felt a surge of frustration and adrenaline as he watched the small mechanical insect float above his property, its camera lens pointed down toward his backyard. This was no longer a subtle nuisance. It was an invasion, a direct challenge to his privacy. Karen's drone had become an extension of her obsessive, controlling behavior, a tool she was using to keep tabs on him, just like she'd done to so many others in the neighborhood. He couldn't let this continue. The time to act was now. His heart raced as he slipped out of the back door, the sound of the drone's whirring blades growing louder. The light breeze cut through the air, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside him. Karen's surveillance had gone from irritating to threatening, and Liam wasn't going to sit idly by and let her spy on him anymore. He had spent days preparing for this moment, fine-tuning his jammer, studying the drone's flight patterns, and ensuring he had the perfect vantage point to strike. He moved quickly, silently, like a hunter stalking his prey. Every step was calculated. His hands trembled slightly as he set up his equipment on the porch. Nothing too obvious, nothing too loud. The jammer was small, portable, designed to fit into the palm of his hand, but its power was deadly. It would send a burst of interference that would scramble the drone's communication with its controller, cutting off the signal and sending it into a free fall. Liam watched the drone as it circled overhead, the red light blinking like an accusing eye. It was getting closer, inching toward him with every pass, as if Karen herself were staring through that camera, waiting for him to make a mistake. He moved to the corner of the porch, positioning the jammer at an angle that would catch the drone's signal just right. He had to be quick. He had to time this perfectly. If he activated it too early, the drone might catch him in the act. If he waited too long, Karen might already have a recording of him. Focus, Liam. One shot. This is it. He held his breath, his finger hovering over the button. The drone was now directly above his property, its camera likely zooming in on the angle of his house, his backyard, the setup he had meticulously arranged to make this moment happen. It would all be over in an instant, one flick of the switch, but he had to be patient. For a moment he questioned his actions. What if he was overreacting? What if Karen didn't even know about this? But deep down, Liam knew. She wasn't just some overly inquisitive neighbor. This was part of something bigger, something far more sinister than a few neighborhood rules. Karen had always been controlling, manipulative. The drone was her weapon of choice, her way of enforcing her will without ever having to lift a finger. The drone's hum grew louder, its shadow casting a fleeting eclipse over the ground as it moved directly overhead, now circling around his backyard with precision. Liam felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment. He slammed his finger down on the button. A split second later, the world seemed to hold its breath. The drone's whirring stopped. Nothing. The silence was deafening. Liam stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the sky. Had it worked? Had he managed to jam the signal? Then, without warning, the red light on the drone blinked erratically, flickering like a dying heartbeat, before it went completely dark. The drone jerked in midair, its flight path going haywire as the signal disconnecting scrambled its systems. Liam's stomach tightened, his breath shallow. He couldn't believe it. He'd done it. He had just grounded Karen's eyes in the sky. But before he could celebrate, a sudden gust of wind sent the drone tumbling uncontrollably. It spiraled downward, crashing hard into his backyard with a sickening thud. Liam froze. His pulse spiked as the reality of what he had just done hit him. The drone was down. But Karen wasn't just going to let this slide. He could already hear the faint sound of her voice in his head. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." The hair on the back of his neck stood up as the possibility settled in like ice in his veins. Karen wasn't going to take this defeat quietly. And Liam, well, he had just made the most dangerous enemy he could imagine. The battle had just begun. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the drone's red light flicker out of existence. His fingers still pressed on the button of the jammer, feeling the cool metal against his skin, as if he were tethered to the device by the sheer force of will. The whirring blades of the drone had gone silent, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Then, the drone's body spasmed mid-air, jerking violently to one side, its wings sputtering like a broken bird. The light on it flickered again, once, twice, and then it plunged. Liam held his breath, his eyes wide as the drone spiraled toward the ground. It fell like a rock, its once steady flight path now chaotic, its movements uncoordinated and erratic. He didn't even have time to step back as the machine plummeted, crashing with a sickening thud into the ground. The sound of splintering, plastic and snapping motors was drowned out by the quiet whoosh of air as the drone finally hit its target. A moment later, the silence was shattered by a splash. Liam stood frozen on his porch, his pulse hammering in his ears. The drone had gone. Down, right into Karen's pool. The ripples from the crash spread outward in slow-motion waves, the metal carcass of the drone sinking beneath the water's surface. He could almost hear Karen's shocked scream, though it hadn't yet happened. The image was almost surreal. There, in the middle of the serene backyard, where Karen would undoubtedly relax under the sun, was her prized pool, the very one that had been the center of neighborhood gossip for years. And now it was home to the mangled wreckage of her precious spy device. Liam allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest finally beginning to loosen. "That's right, Karen. You're not the only one who can control things around here." But the satisfaction was short-lived. A distant voice broke through the stillness of the morning, cutting through the air like a razor blade. "What the hell?" Liam's blood ran cold. It was Karen. He could hear her even from across the street. She sounded frantic, her voice rising with each passing second. Her high-pitched shrieks grew louder as the sound of her running footsteps echoed toward the pool. No turning back now, Liam thought, his throat tightening. The drone had crashed hard, sinking slowly beneath the shimmering surface of the water, but the immediate consequences were already starting to unfold. Karen's yelling intensified, each scream filled with disbelief and fury. He could picture her now, standing at the edge of her pool, staring in horror at the wreckage of the drone. And then, there it was, a new sound. The unmistakable hiss of a car engine starting up. Karen's voice barely discernible over the roar, but Liam could hear the familiar words, something about getting the authorities involved, calling for backup. She's not going to let this go. Not a chance. The momentary thrill of victory turned into a knot of unease in Liam's stomach. Yes, he had outsmarted her for now, but there was no way Karen was going to let this humiliating defeat slide. Liam's gaze darted over to the jammer, still gripped in his hand, his fingers now tightening around the device as the cold reality sank in. This wasn't just a random incident. Karen was smart, ruthless. She wasn't the type to back down because her surveillance gadget had taken a dive into her pool, and now she was coming for him. Liam could already imagine the storm that was brewing. Karen would find a way to twist the situation, to make it look like he was the villain. That was just the way she operated. Her need to control everything around her, from the HOA to her neighbors, was too powerful for her to accept defeat. He had no doubt she'd escalate this. Call the authorities. Call the HOA. Call in every favor she had to make his life hell. Liam exhaled again, this time in frustration. But he wasn't done yet. He wasn't about to let Karen dictate his life any longer. This is just the beginning. She wants a war? She's got one. But as the reality of what he had done started to sink in, he couldn't help but wonder how far Karen would take this. How far would she go to make him pay for what he'd done? His victory felt hollow now, like a spark in the dark. With Karen's words still echoing in his mind, Liam turned back toward his house, determined to prepare for whatever came next. The drone might be down, but Karen's wrath was only just beginning. And this time, Liam was ready for her. The moment. The drone hit the water. Liam knew it was only a matter of time before the storm hit. But what he hadn't expected was the ferocity of Karen's reaction. The high-pitched screeching that erupted from her yard was like a signal flare in the otherwise tranquil neighborhood. It felt like the calm before the worst kind of storm, a storm that would shake everything in its path. Liam could barely make out the words over the distance, but the tone was unmistakable. Karen was furious. It only took a minute for her to storm over, her eyes wild with disbelief, her fists clenched at her sides like she might explode at any moment. She didn't even bother to knock as she slammed her hand against his door, so it begins. Liam was ready. His heart still raced from the thrill of watching the drone fall. But now, with Karen standing on his doorstep, everything slowed down. The silence was suffocating, broken only by her increasingly shrill voice. "You did this! I know you did!" Karen screamed, her face flushed red with rage. "You sabotaged my drone, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it." Liam exhaled slowly, forcing himself to keep calm despite the rapid fire of her accusations. His mind raced with ways to diffuse the situation, but deep down, he knew this wouldn't be so easy. Karen had always been relentless. He'd been waiting for this exact moment, the moment she would try to break him down. "Karen, I don't know what you're talking about," Liam said, his voice measured, almost casual. He leaned against the door frame, keeping his posture relaxed. He wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. But Karen wasn't listening. She was too far gone. Her eyes gleamed with fury, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. The screen flashed with an emergency call. "I'm calling the cops," she hissed, barely containing her fury. "You're Going to jail for this, Liam. You destroyed my property. Liam could feel his pulse quickening. He had been expecting this, but the reality of the situation still struck like a slap to the face. He had crossed a line. Karen wasn't just going to back off. She wasn't going to let this go. She'd escalated. She always did. He stepped aside and let the door swing open, giving her a cold, unbothered stare. Call the cops, Karen. I'm not stopping you. But Karen wasn't done. She turned on her heel, storming back toward her house, her anger practically radiating off her. As she marched back, she pulled out her phone again, speaking in clipped tones. I'm reporting you to the HOA. You've gone too far this time, she muttered, loud enough for Liam to hear. Liam's stomach tightened at the thought. The HOA. Of course, that was where she would turn next. He knew exactly what that meant. Karen had allies in the neighborhood, and the HOA was notorious for siding with her. If she'd called them in, things were about to get much worse. Before he could process it further, Karen's car roared to life. Liam glanced out the window and watched as she sped off down the street. His stomach churned. She wasn't going to let this slide. He could already picture her storming into the HOA office, whipping up a storm, turning the entire neighborhood against him. His mind raced, running through worst-case scenarios. She might file a police report, accuse him of trespassing or tampering with private property. The worst part? The HOA could find a way to make this stick. She had influence, and she knew how to twist the truth to fit her narrative. He'd seen it happen too many times before. A deep sense of dread began to settle over him as he realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. Karen wasn't just going to make him a target. She was going to go after everything he had. She'd drag him through the mud if it meant satisfying her need for control. But what else could he do? The damage had been done. The drone was destroyed, and there was no taking it back. His phone buzzed on the table and he glanced down at it. A message from an unknown number. It was a picture of Karen's pool, with the drones shattered, remains floating beneath the water's surface. The text below it was simple, but it sent a chill down his spine. I have everything on you now. Liam's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. Who could have sent this? Had Karen already rallied the troops? Or was it someone else? Someone with their own motives? There was only one thing he knew for sure. Things had just taken a turn for the worse, and Karen wasn't going to stop until she'd ruined him. Liam stood at the edge of his porch, staring out into the neighborhood, his mind working overtime. He hadn't expected things to escalate this far. His pulse was still hammering from the confrontation with Karen, but now, in the quiet aftermath, a sense of calm had washed over him. The weight of what was about to happen settled deep in his chest. He needed to turn this around. He couldn't let Karen win. He'd had enough of being her target. He had to outsmart her. He had no idea what Karen was planning next, but he knew her well enough by now. She wasn't the type to just let something go. No, she would come back with something more venomous, more destructive. The neighborhood felt suffocating now, as if every street lamp, every quiet house was watching him, waiting for the next move. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and looked at the message again, the one with the picture of the drone floating in Karen's pool. The sender was still unknown, but the timing couldn't have been more perfect. A thought flickered in the back of his mind, and he quickly dialed a number he hadn't called in months. An hour later, Liam was standing at the edge of Karen's pool, the dark water reflecting the harsh light of the full moon. He had made a call, but it wasn't to the police or the HOA. It was to someone who owed him a favor, a very useful favor. He'd called in a private investigator, someone who had a knack for digging up dirt on people. He'd learned a long time ago that there was power in knowing the right people, and today he would use that power to his advantage. Everything in place? Liam asked, his voice low, steady. Perfectly, the investigator, named Dan, replied from the other side of the pool. Dan's voice was muffled by the shadows, but Liam could hear the faint rustle of him moving around. "I got what you need. Everything you asked for." Liam's lips curled into a grim smile. The investigator had dug into Karen's past, and he had uncovered something that could turn the tables in a heartbeat. The thing Karen didn't know, the thing that could ruin her plans, was that her own surveillance methods weren't as clean as she thought. She'd broken more laws than she realized. The next morning, Karen's anger was palpable. She stood in her front yard, phone pressed to her ear, waving her arms as if the whole neighborhood could hear her screeching. The authorities had been called, and she was now officially trying to frame Liam for what she claimed was a deliberate attack on her property. Of course, she conveniently left out the part where she had hired a drone to spy on him, completely ignoring the privacy laws she was clearly violating. Liam, however, wasn't worried. He had set the trap perfectly. He knew Karen would act rashly. She always did. And sure enough, as he watched her from across the street, he saw it unfold. She was speaking to a couple of HOA board members, trying to convince them that she was the victim of a malicious attack. But then the doorbell rang. Liam had already anticipated this. He had his plan in place. He opened the door to find a pair of uniformed officers, their expressions stern but not unfriendly. "Mr. Harris," one of them asked. "We're here to ask about an incident involving your neighbor." Liam gave them a polite smile, his mind already knowing what was coming next. "Of course, officers. I'm happy to help, but I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding." The officers stepped inside, and the conversation shifted from polite pleasantries to the real reason they were there. They weren't here to arrest him. They were here to investigate Karen's accusations. And that's when Liam made his move. "I think you'll find it interesting," he began, "that Karen's drone wasn't just spying on me. She's been using it to invade my privacy without my permission. That's not just a violation of my rights. It's also against the law." Liam pulled out his phone and showed them the incriminating image, the one Karen had sent him the night before. It was the photo of the drone in the pool, but the real kicker was the timestamp embedded in the metadata. The metadata wasn't from his phone, it was from Karen's surveillance system. "I'm sure you're aware," Liam continued, his voice cool and collected, "that using drones to invade someone's private property without their consent is not just unethical, it's illegal. And I think you'll find that Karen's actions go a bit further than she's let on. She's not just violating my rights, she's violating the law." The officers exchanged a glance. One of them tapped something into his tablet, and after a few seconds of quiet typing, he looked up. "You're right," he said, nodding. "This is indeed a violation of federal regulations." Liam's eyes gleamed with a quiet satisfaction. He could see the wheels turning in the officers' heads. They were processing everything, and in the end, they knew the truth. Karen's frantic face came into view shortly afterward. She marched up to Liam's house, looking even angrier than before, but this time, something was different. The officers stood between them now, blocking her from getting any closer. "You have to be kidding me," Karen snapped. "This is outrageous." "Actually, Karen," one of the officers said, his tone neutral but firm, "it's you who's in trouble. You've been illegally spying on Mr. Harris here, and we have evidence that proves it." The shock that registered on Karen's face was almost comical, her eyes wide with disbelief as she tried to backpedal. But it was too late. The officers were already handing her a notice, an official warning, with a report to follow. And in that moment, Karen knew her control over the neighborhood was slipping away. As the officers walked away, Liam's grin widened. He'd outsmarted Karen, turned the tables completely. She had underestimated him, thought she could bully him into submission, but now it was her who would face the consequences. But the best part? The twist. As Liam turned to head back into his house, he spotted a familiar face standing across the street. His neighbor, the one who had sent him the picture of Karen's drone in the pool. The neighbor gave him a sly wink. "Nice job, Liam," they called out. Liam chuckled, shaking his head. "You too," he muttered under his breath. In the end, the neighborhood had learned a valuable lesson. Don't mess with someone who's not afraid to fight back. And as for Karen, well, she wouldn't be getting any more control over this block anytime soon. With a final laugh, Liam shut the door behind him. The battle was over, but the war? That was just beginning. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.